Mic's are on.
Good evening and welcome to the MILLBRAE Planning Commission for this Monday, December 4th, 2023. Good evening and welcome to the MILLBRAE Planning Commission for this Monday, December 4th, 2023. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and if we could start with the roll call.
Commissioner Choi?
Here.
Commissioner Chan?
Here.
Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Here.
Thank you. All members of the Planning Commission are present.
Great, and if you're able to, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'd like to start off with something we did at the last meeting, we'll do again today. This is a land acknowledgement. The MILLBRAE Planning Commission acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We wish to pay our respects to the ancestors and relatives of the Ramaytush community and to affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. We recognize that the Ramaytush Ohlone have lived in harmony with nature for millennia, and that to achieve a truly ecologically sustainable future for MILLBRAE, we must embrace indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and how we can care for the city's lands, waters, and all its people. We will continue to uplift and foster a meaningful relationship with the Ramaytush Ohlone community, and we welcome all to visit www.ramaytush.org to learn more about the Ramaytush Ohlone people. Okay, and we have first on our agenda tonight is just the agenda review. If there's any questions, comments about the agenda for tonight. Okay, given none, we'll go on to the approval of meeting minutes. This is for the regular meeting minutes of October 16th, 2023. Any comments, questions, clarifications from commissioners?
I have a question. So last meeting, Chair Wong asked for additional notes or sort of more elaborations on the topics. Has that been discussed by staff, or what's the status on that?
Yes, we included the concerns from the neighbors from the project on page 2. A summary of their concerns was included. It's in the minutes.
Thank you.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Davis.
Second?
A second. And Christy, if we can go with a roll call vote.
Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item number 3 for tonight is public communications. This is reserved for any persons wishing to comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. Do we have any speaker slips for tonight?
There are no slips and no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, so if there's no further comments, then we'll move on to right along to item number 4. The first public hearing item is for 930 Hillcrest. Before we start into the staff report, are there any commissioner disclosures, ex parte communications? Okay, given that, looks like Roscoe is ready to go.
Good evening, commissioners. Roscoe Mata, Planning Manager. I'll be presenting this project tonight on behalf of Nestor, who's not able to make it this evening. This project is at 930 Hillcrest Boulevard, and it is a design review permit application for a a second-story addition and remodel to an existing house. As previously mentioned, this project is at 930 Hillcrest Boulevard, and then the subject property is a design review, subject item is a design review permit for a first-story renovation in a 1,025 square foot addition to the second story in the R1 zoning district. Here you can see the project's location. It's located in the red dot here, which is just southwest of the central of MILLBRAE. So the zone is R1. The property is 7,186 square feet. It currently contains an existing single-family home, a little over 3,000 square feet, and the project will renovate the existing house and expand to the rear of the second story. And this project is coming before you after the previous version was reviewed by the Planning Commission a couple years ago. So this is the existing site plan. As you can see, the Hillcrest Boulevard is to the top of the screen. There's an existing driveway, shows the footprint of the house, and shows the lot size here. Okay. Here's the proposed site plan. As you can see, the addition is denoted in hatched. So the addition is to the rear of the house. It conforms to all the setbacks, the rear and the side setbacks. This is the proposed first floor plan. It contains a renovation to the existing first floor, has the existing garage, and it will include the foundation for the house, the extension to the rear. And then the proposed second floor plan that shows the additional family room, living room, and then an additional bedroom to the rear with a new deck. And then the front elevation as proposed, as I mentioned earlier, the addition will be to the rear, so there'll be new windows, pretty much a entire home remodel with a large addition occurring in the rear of the property. Here's the rear elevation that shows the height of the existing roof pitch. The addition is slightly lower by a couple of feet. That helps preserve the views of the upslope neighbor. And then the left side elevation as it's viewed from the upslope neighbor. This is the right side elevation as viewed from the downslope neighbor. You can see the addition here is would be to the right, and then consists of several new windows also. And then here's the rendering of the project in relation to the upslope neighbor. There's some existing views there, but the new addition will be preserving those views, and it's designed to be compatible with the existing surrounding area. In terms of the neighbor response, a total of 6 neighbor owner consultation forms were sent. We didn't receive any forms either opposed or against, but in addition to sending out the forms, staff reached out to adjacent neighbors and didn't receive any opposition to the project. The neighbor west of the project site originally expressed loss of view regarding the previous project. The addition is at a lower elevation, and when we spoke to him at the counter, the neighbor expressed no concerns. So in summary, the design review permit findings, as you note here, are the following. The architectural, landscaping, and general appearance of the proposed building or structure and grounds are in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. The proposed project complies with the applicable development regulations. And then the project will not cause a significant visual impact from neighboring views from principal rooms of residence, unless it's proven by the applicant there are no other viable or cost-effective alternative. And the proposal is not detrimental to the orderly, harmonious, and safe development of the city. and will not impair the desirability of investment or occupation in the neighborhood in which the building or structure is proposed to be erected. And with that, staff recommends approval of the project. Planning Commission consider the public testimony, the recommendation, and the findings, and consider adopting an attached resolution for the design review permit. The applicant is here. I'm not sure if planning to say a few words, but staff's available for questions should the commission have any.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Let's go. Are there any questions for staff at this time?
So in the past, you've included like a scan of the certified mail receipts indicating that the forms have been sent out. I don't recall them being part of the packet this time. There were none? Okay. Is it just practice that you don't include that if no forms were returned, or?
I mean, it's not required. We just
Okay.
provide it just to show that the commission, that they were sent out. We do have it in the project file. It may just inadvertently be
Okay.
omitted from the.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, if there are no other questions for staff, thank you, Roscoe. At this point, we'd like to invite the owner or architect to come up to provide an overview of the project. If you could state your name.
Hi, good evening. My name is Bill Guan. I'm the architect. I'm representing the owner today. And as you remember, if you remember, or any of you, this project was presented to you maybe a year ago. Maybe I think it's more than that because it was COVID and we were online, and that was a 3-story addition, and it was rejected by the commissioner. But this time we presented with just a 2nd-story addition, and all the walk are mostly located rear, and it doesn't block the upper neighbor's view. So I hope I think Walls presented the project really well. So I don't want to go do that, and I hope you can give us a chance to look at it, and hopefully you can approve it. We have been, put a lot of effort into these projects. 2 designs, 2 commission hearing. So and the story pole was built twice. So I hope you can give us a chance and approve this project tonight.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you. If you had any question, I'm here to answer.
Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to see if there's any persons from the public wishing to comment at this time, and then before we get into questions for the architect, and then after that, if there's any responses to the questions from the public, then we'll ask you back up again and also discuss any commissioner questions, okay? Thank you. So Christy, do we have any persons wishing to comment on this project?
There are no speaker slips and no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, so then can we have a vote to close the public comments? Or a motion, actually.
I move to close public comment.
Second.
What am I starting with? Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Public comment is now closed.
Okay, great. So thanks for waiting, Bill. So if we have any commissioner comments, questions for the architect? Are there any?
No, I would like to make a comment, though. I appreciate what you have done. It looks like a much better project than we had 2 years ago. I remember being on the site, and
Commissioner Quigg,
it's on.
A little closer, I think.
Oh, my God. I had been on the site plan a couple of years ago, and this is a much better project than you had presented in the past. I truly hope that the applicants are happy that we did what we did up here, because I think they'll be much happier with the home. And they'll be happy with their neighbors.
Thank you.
I want to make a comment. I was not here last time this was presented. I'm looking at the set of documents right now. I think the addition is very consistent with the existing home as well as with the character of the neighborhood. I expect the builder would build the home with the craft and quality that's shown on the rendering. I think that'll be very important, so that it appears as one intentional house in whole. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so just a question for you, Bill. So the front rendering, it appears that there's no changes other than new windows to the front facing the street, right?
That
No
is
roof-
correct.
No roof changes, no structural changes, no landscape or other, right?
The landscape very much stay the same, but the garage door does increase a little bit because we had to fit the 2 cars in there.
So that's going to be just a cutout of the existing
Yes.
building. We're not enlarging any, right? I saw that, yeah, the garage is a little bit larger. Makes sense to be able to fit the 2 cars in. And putting in that, relocating the bathroom on the bottom floor and making another bedroom connected to the bathroom. I think the rendering's outstanding, really good detail job down to the plants and landscaping. So a lot of confidence in your ability to work with the owner and go into the construction phase. That's a good job.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so if there's no other questions for the architect, then thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Take a
Thank
seat.
you.
And then any further discussion from commissioners?
I'm good.
Motion?
I move that we approve the design review permit for the first-story renovation and a 1,025 square foot second-story addition to an existing two-story residence in the R1 zone district at 930 Hillcrest Boulevard.
Second?
And Christie with the vote?
Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. The vote is approved 5-0.
Congratulations on the project. The action of the Planning Commission is considered final pending 10-day appeal period and payment of the required appeal fee. If anyone wishes to appeal the decision or of the Planning Commission, please contact City Clerk. Thank you.
That was much more fun.
Okay, now we're going into public hearing item B, vehicle miles traveled, VMT,
Oh, we're doing that one?
thresholds, and screening policy.
Good evening, Chair Wong and members of the Planning Commission. For the record, Angelica Gonzalez, Senior Planner with the City of MILLBRAE. Our Planning Division. Joining me this evening is Roscoe Matta, the Planning Manager, along with Matt Goyne and Alex Murray, who will also be joining us with Farron Pierce, who are transportation consultants and have been assisting the City of MILLBRAE through the development of the vehicle miles traveled thresholds and screening policy. The item before you is item 4B, vehicle miles traveled thresholds and screening policy, to adopt a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of MILLBRAE recommending that the City Council adopt a citywide vehicle miles traveled, also known as VMT, threshold screening policy establishing VMT as the metric for conducting transportation impact analysis for the purpose of environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, known as CEQA, to comply with the requirements of Senate Bill 743. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin with providing you with background, specifically why we are developing a vehicle miles traveled thresholds and screening policy. On September 27th, 2013, SB 743, signed by then Governor Jerry Brown, requiring Governor's Office of Planning and Research known as OPR, to amend the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines to develop alternative metrics to 1, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 2, develop multimodal transportation networks, and 3, provide a diversity of land uses in proximity to one another. Next slide, please. Effective July 1st, 2020, compliance was required, and SB 743 legislation required local jurisdictions to shift from the use of level of service, which is a measure of vehicle delay, to vehicle miles traveled, a method that assesses the distance of vehicle travel attributed to a project or use to define transportation impacts under CEQA. The Governor's Office of Planning and Research recommended that jurisdictions replace LOS with VMT to measure transportation impacts under CEQA. Cities can still use level of service within the local development review process to inform site access and traffic operation decisions, but level of service cannot be used to evaluate CEQA impacts or mitigations with respect to transportation. The City of MILLBRAE will continue to use level of service for specific projects consistent with the general plan. Next slide, please. So ultimately, this changes the focus of transportation impact analysis in CEQA from measuring impacts to drivers to impacts of driving. So unlike level of service, vehicle miles traveled does not assess the local vehicle trips from a project or the project's traffic impacts on a local intersection or road or highway segment, but rather vehicle miles traveled assesses the effects of the project on a regional traffic and use of transit and non-motorized travel. And so to comply with SB 743, the city has prepared a VMT thresholds and screening policy that supports the shift from measuring transportation impacts from LOS to VMT. So this policy, as you see in attachment 1, Exhibit A, includes 5 sections, and those sections in the policy include screening criteria for land use projects, screening criteria for transportation projects, project impact analysis, VMT impact significance thresholds, and then non-CEQA transportation analysis. And as part of the development of the policy, staff has received technical advisory support from Association of Bay Area Governments and Metropolitan Transportation Commission in support of this transition from LOS to VMT, who have provided technical assistance to all Bay Area jurisdictions needing assistance with development of this policy. Tools and localized assistance were provided to help the city prepare the VMT thresholds and screening policy for adoption. Staff has also hired transportation consultant, Fair & Peers, to assist the city in preparing its VMT thresholds and screening policy. With that, staff also evaluated the goals, policies, and desired outcomes of the City of MILLBRAE's general plan and other transportation policies to analyze effects on land development in the city. The City of MILLBRAE has adopted several policies that support the shift from measuring transportation impacts based on level of service to using vehicle miles traveled. This proposed VMT policy is consistent with the general plan and transportation goals. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to transition this presentation for Alex Murray to provide more information on VMT along with the VMT policy.
Hello, good evening, Commissioners. I'm Alex Murray, a transportation planner with Fair & Peers, and I'll be discussing VMT this evening. VMT is the total amount of driving generated by a project, and so instead of measuring traffic delay experienced by drivers, which is traditionally measured through the metric level of service, the state has required that for projects for CEQA purposes, analyze the amount of driving generated by a project using a metric called vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. And VMT accounts for both the frequency and distance of driving. So a person driving 1 mile generates 1 VMT. Next slide, please. VMT estimates are based on regional travel patterns and can influenced by factors such as transportation infrastructure, transit service, and the density of land use in the area. Next slide. When compared to LOS, VMT and environmental review better connects environmental impact measures to state greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So next I'll be walking through some analysis procedures for vehicle miles traveled. So this slide provides an overview of the VMT analysis process for CEQA, and it looks complicated, but I'll break this down into three main phases. The first phase being project screening, the second phase being establishing a VMT threshold, and then the third, if necessary, mitigating VMT from a project. So let's start with phase one. Project screens allow city staff and developers to quickly identify low VMT projects that do not require further CEQA transportation analysis. These low VMT projects are presumed to have a less than significant impact and therefore do not require conducting a detailed study and do not require VMT mitigation. The California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, OPR, recommends that projects such as certain developments located near high-quality transit or 100% affordable housing projects should be presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact and would not require further analysis or mitigation. So you can see on the screen here some of the types of projects based on their characteristics that would be presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact. This map shows areas of MILLBRAE that are considered high-quality transit areas. That's the areas on this map that are highlighted in yellow, and low VMT areas, which are areas on this map highlighted in green. This map's for residential projects, but the process is similar for retail and office uses. And qualifying projects located in either the yellow or green or both areas would be screened and would not require further VMT analysis. If a project doesn't screen based on its characteristics, a VMT threshold is used to measure if there is a significant impact and if the project requires further VMT analysis. The thresholds of significance here are recommended by OPR for residential, office, retail, and mixed-use land use projects, and these recommendations align with the state's long-range greenhouse gas modeling and reduction goals, and they're considered defensible. So, for example, a residential project would not have a significant VMT impact if the area it's located in has VMT per person that is 15% lower than the current Bay Area average per person. And for mixed-use projects, so let's say a mixed-use residential and retail project, each component of the project is analyzed separately. To demonstrate how screens and thresholds are applied, let's look at an example of a residential project, residential and retail project next to the station, the MILLBRAE Barton Caltrain station. And this example project is on the site. We picked an example location. It's on the site of the existing gateway at MILLBRAE development. And this would be this hypothetical project is 472 units. It's next to high quality transit and includes 2,000 square feet of retail and is 10% affordable. Based on the project description, the proposed project is mixed use with residential and retail components, and OPR recommends assessing each land use individually. So we'll start by looking at the residential component of the project. We'll check the project screen first for the residential elements. The 472 units don't meet the small infill project screen, which is 20 units or less. And only 10% of the units are affordable, so it doesn't meet the 100% affordable requirement for that screening criteria. And so in conclusion, the residential component of this hypothetical project wouldn't meet the project-based screens and would require some additional analysis. The next step would be looking at the location of the project. So the first screen is based on how is VMT in the surrounding area of the project. And that's calculated using CCAG, the City County Association of Governments of San Mateo County, has a web-based tool available, which applicants can input the information on their projects and its characteristics and see the VMT in that immediate area of the project. And if OPR's recommended threshold is that to qualify as a low VMT area, the VMT per person in the area surrounding the project should be 15% lower than the Bay Area VMT per person. In this hypothetical project, it's not located in an area where the VMT is 15% lower, so it wouldn't meet that criteria. However, the project's located next to high-quality transit within a half-mile, and it meets the other criteria listed as a minimum floor area ratio and some parking criteria. And so this hypothetical project located near the station would be presumed to have a less than significant impact because it's located next to high-quality transit. We would look at the retail part of the project separately. The retail project is 20,000 square feet in this example. OPR recommends that smaller retail projects that could either be considered 50,000 square feet or 30,000 square feet be screened and be assumed to have a less than significant VMT impact because they're serving the local community. And so this, in this hypothetical project, this retail component would also screen from further VMT analysis. And so the project as a whole, if we go to the next slide, please, both the residential component would screen of this hypothetical project based on its proximity to high quality transit, and the retail component would screen out because of its size. And so the project would be assumed to have a less than significant VMT impact. Although our example that we went through now didn't require mitigation, some projects may not screen for VMT and would be found to have a significant VMT impact. And the applicant could take advantage of a suite of transportation demand management or TDM measures that are included in that CCAG tool I mentioned. They can select from a menu of different options, including site-specific options such as subsidizing transit passes or reducing the supply of parking. And each one of those measures would have a quantifiable VMT reduction where they would be able to take credit and get below that 15% threshold. Oh, yes. And finally, it's a slightly separate project, but we went through land use and VMT from land use, but this also applies to transportation projects too. So transportation projects also require a VMT analysis to see if they lead to an increase in VMT. So for example, adding a new lane to an existing roadway makes it easier to drive, which would lead to more VMT. And this type of situation is less common for cities like MILLBRAE, but it is something to take into consideration. On your screen here are some transportation projects that would be presumed to not increase VMT and would have a less than significant impact, and that includes adding new transit routes, modifying and adding traffic signals, and installing roundabouts. They would all be presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact. I'll hand it over back to Angelica. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So staff would also like to acknowledge that after the publication of the staff report and the VMT policy, there were minor revisions made to the staff report and draft VMT thresholds and screening policy to provide clarification. And staff has prepared a redlined version of the staff report and policy identifying these changes, which is also provided below. The revised documents have also been posted on our website. Next slide, please. And with that, staff recommends adopting a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of MILLBRAE recommending that the City Council adopt a resolution designating the use of VMT thresholds and screening policy, establishing VMT as the metric for conducting transportation analysis for the purpose of environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act to comply with the requirements of Senate Bill 743. And with that, staff is available for questions along with the consultant for peers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Alex. Do we have questions from Commission? Actually, it's just for Commission review, right? So we'll keep this for the Commission for comments. Questions?
I just had a really quick question. Is this the redlined one?
That's correct. There's very minor changes.
Yeah, I'm not finding it.
Christy, if you can just go back to the previous slide. Yes.
Down at the end?
Yeah, so at the end on page 13 of the staff report, we've
Okay.
made just a minor change.
Oh,
And
okay.
then in the policy, there is table 4, which is shown here on this slide, where there's some minor changes to the scoring that you see on this slide on page 10 and 11 of the policy in attachment 1, exhibit A. So just very minor.
Okay, Nathan?
So, first of all, thanks so much for this detailed presentation. This is definitely a very complicated topic, and I'm kind of like an amateur geek on it too, and I feel like this is definitely I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm sorry, I might have lots of questions, so I hope you all will grant me some forbearance on
We
this.
probably have
So,
the same questions.
So my first question, sort of at a high level, is how often do we think that this policy will be revisited and revised?
I can answer that. We don't bring forth a policy that we think, isn't ready. I mean, that being said, in the future, there may be instances or situations where the policy didn't align with city's goals and objectives. But in terms of applying this policy, we expect that all projects to be consistent with it. We reviewed it and tested it against projects that we have approved in the past. And just given the screening criteria, most of those projects that we have reviewed would be able to be screened, and that is consistent with what we've done. And for example, the 959 El Camino Real project applied the OPR thresholds for CEQA. And as you remember, that project, we had applied CEQA categorical exemption with a CEQA checklist. So we don't expect a lot of revisions to this, but that being said, it's hard to say in the future what those might be if we need to.
Okay, thanks. And I believe I've ordered my questions according to where they appear in the staff report and the policy document. So my first question is in the staff report on page 10. So here's the, this table describes the different sort of general categories of land use and what metrics will apply to them. So two questions sort of came to me while reviewing this table. What exactly is for the hotel category? We talk about a qualitative project effect. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that would mean? If a new hotel were to be proposed in MILLBRAE outside the screening area, and two of our biggest hotels are outside the screening area, what would go into the qualitative analysis of VMT?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Staff would actually like to defer that question to Fair and Pierce.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Matt Goin with Fair and Pierce. So hotels typically serve a market that is local in nature, unless they are, drawing people, unless they are kind of like a resort or something like that are causing people to travel outside their way. So qualitative approach would be looking at and understanding whether, what is their business plan that they're bringing in? What are they proposing? Are they proposing uses that are typical to, MILLBRAE? What we've found whenever we've done any sort of quantitative analysis of hotels on the peninsula is that they're serving the existing customer, the businesses and stuff that are nearby. So they are not inherently increasing VMT, regional VMT, because they're filling, someone wants to build it because there's a demand for it in the area.
Got it, thanks.
Actually, Nathan, so, when you discuss a subject like maybe table 2, before you move on from that, maybe if you're done with table 2, then just check to see if there's any other.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah,
don't have
yeah.
to keep revisiting.
Certainly.
Same thing. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I have one more question on table 2, which is so there's this sort of catch-all other category that seems to assume something more like the regional VMT measure. So would that apply to things like schools, houses of worship, shipping warehouses, if there were shipping warehouses proposed for MILLBRAE's industrial areas?
Hi, for the record, Angelica Gonzalez, City of MILLBRAE. The reason why we added an other section was just to have a catch-all, just in case we receive a use that's not identified on the list. And so hopefully this will address any sort of future use that is not inclusive of Table 2.
Okay, that's all I had on this table. If others have questions on.
Okay, actually, I do have a question. So I think one of the objectives for our general plan is to have this kind of urban village. And we also want to promote economic growth. And one of the big, I think, themes of our whole Bay Area is tech. So if we were to have or encourage like a large, for example, pre-post-pandemic stage tech company, how would that affect, how would this affect the ability to do that? And then what I'm thinking is that, if the whole city of MILLBRAE is like 2 miles across, and I know there's a lot of statements about zoning ordinances or restrictions or allowances if you're within half a mile of the BART station. But really, half a mile of BART station, that's like 5-minute, 10-minute walk. And if you're, we're attracting businesses or a tech hub or company, really I would like to see if we kind of don't have this restricting the ability to attract like a large company, like even in the middle of downtown, maybe a mile or a mile and a half, which is only a 30-minute walk from the BART station. So ideally, I think we'd want to make sure that these, evaluations or VMTs or calculations don't restrict that type of a development. We'd want to encourage, I think this whole purpose is to encourage transportation. We're a major transportation hub. We always talk about it being the largest transportation hub west of the Mississippi. So if we make full use of that, and then, we should get credit to allow, almost 0 vehicle miles traveled if people use that facility and BART in from the whole Bay Area, from the South Bay on Caltrain, all the way to over to Livermore, Fremont, Antioch from BART. So I just want to know if this VMT is going to restrict the ability to do that, or if it allows that.
The VMT policy isn't going to restrict development. It is a tool to measure that development's transportation impacts. So it's not saying that because you have a development in this location, you wouldn't be able to have it because of high VMT. There are options to potentially mitigate those transportation impacts through TDM measures, for example. So I will say that it is not just the location adjacent to the BART station, but also within high-quality transit corridor, which El Camino Real is. So on page 5 of the policy attached to the resolution is the employee VMT map. It shows the green areas being below VMT threshold. So all the sites that we have identified in our housing element, as well as sites that are within the El Camino Real and downtown El Camino Real specific plan are within that location. So presumably they would be screened out.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Nathan.
Okay, so my next question has to do with the choice of threshold. The 15% below the baseline being the threshold. how many jurisdictions are considering this threshold? Are there others thresholds that we could, that are being floated?
Thank you, Commissioner. I got the nod for this one. So 15% is pretty universally used. I'll just refer to that. There's really very few cities that have adopted anything really different than that. Cities have, you as lead agency, you have the ultimate authority to decide what your values are and how you balance the range of local goals and state objectives that are being expressed here. So that includes, the state objectives to reduce climate change, state objective to address our housing, affordability issues, and local goals of like the type of development and growth that you want to see. So ultimately, lead agency, you have the responsibility to set that based on kind of what's feasible here, as well as the substantial evidence that supports it. But in terms of deviating substantially from 15%, no one has adopted that I'm aware of anything much more strict than that.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, yeah, so just noting on that also, again, I guess our city is very urban, as compared to maybe a city like Livermore or Fremont, where people have to drive in their car just to practically go across the street to the next store. And so I would suggest having, setting the bar much higher, that people should be able to take much shorter trips. I'm not sure what the regional average is, but I don't think we can compare our city in the trips across town, like just 2 miles, to driving even from one freeway exit to the next in Livermore. So it's just, we want to encourage some standards that's going to provide a threshold that tells the developer we should design with this intent in mind to be able to have a walkable city or have some improvements if, say that, make the improvements if they have a development or major development. It should add some improvements so that it provides a more walkable city, like, in lieu fees or provide mitigation measures to make our city more walkable, walking paths, bike lots, or contribute to like even, public parking garage. Because if we reduce the amount of parking requirements on other facilities, then, it's going to put a burden on the city to make up for it and provide, permitted parking or parking garage or some other. If that makes sense.
Through the chair, staff is proposing 15%. It's the standard that was recommended by state OPR. We think that is a very reasonable threshold to apply that balances both the city's interests in economic development and providing the city with a threshold that's accepted by many other jurisdictions. So I think what we could do is just, I recommend moving forward with this threshold and then possibly maybe looking at it in the future. But in terms of the recommendations, this is from the state, and so I wouldn't want to deviate too much away from that.
I guess what I might suggest is if we're looking at the whole region, the whole Bay Area as a threshold for 15%, maybe narrow it down and look at what might be comparable for an more urban city like in ours, or maybe even like San Francisco or South San Francisco, or trips or miles taken for commuters, not like from the East Bay, but commuters like in this smaller region. We can define smaller, but that's my suggestion.
Doing that would be making the development projects, holding them to a more stringent comparison, and that could jeopardize the city's goals of economic development.
Actually, I had a follow-up question. I had the same question about the threshold. I don't know what 15% actually means in terms of actual impact from developments or to developments. To be clear, the threshold determines whether project's green or not, correct? It doesn't mean the project's not going to get passed or approved, but it's just an additional level of analysis to be performed.
Once a project is screened out, there's no further analysis. If the project is not screened, meaning they're not within the half mile, for instance, then you would determine whether the VMT is above or below the threshold. And if it doesn't exceed it, then there's no significant impact. But if it does, then you'd have to do more mitigation.
Right. And maybe it's a very basic question. How the baseline VMT, what is the basis by which the methodology assume how people travel or how much people travel in the region? And then related to Chair Wang's question, is it the same for the entire Bay Area? Are there regional differences in how the baseline VMT is set?
Refer to the experts on this one.
Yeah, I was able to, thank you, Commissioner. Detailed questions. So I was able to pull up CCAG as documentation about the levels of VMT that are generated on average for the region versus San Mateo County. So for example, for home-based, for people's home-based VMTs, the total amount of VMT that you generate as a resident for the region is around, say, 14.5 miles per day, while San Mateo County is slightly below that at 13.8. And MILLBRAE is a little bit below that as well at 13. So what your points are correct, that MILLBRAE is a little bit more efficient. Keep in mind, of course, that you're, compare it, as what we've been talking about, a lot of the city does have the screen out. So we're really talking about those areas that don't screen out. So we're talking about mostly the hills where you would end up having an potential impact in this city.
So if I'm hearing correctly, the baseline does take into consideration the city, the differences among cities and regions.
Yeah. And so basically what OPR said is compare yourself to the region. For residential, you can also compare yourself to the city if you so desire.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so just a clarifying question with respect to the staff amendment that was discussed. So the parking screening criteria now, like the most is that projects will be ineligible if they provide more parking than required by the code or as indicated by the parking generation manual, correct? That's the version that staff is submitting?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I guess when we talk about the resolution to pass, I think there are still, a question I had coming into this was there's still some of the older language and different language in the policy and the staff report, and we should, before this goes to council, it should all be harmonized to read just this one. And then in terms of overall, do you know how our parking minimums compare to the ITE parking generation manual? Are our parking minimums higher than theirs? Are they lower? Are they about the same? Do we have the same number of categories?
Honestly, we haven't looked at our standards compared to IT generation. So, one of the things that I've heard the council talk about a lot recently is better parking management of downtown. And I've heard floated by some council members this idea of building more parking downtown or on the outskirts of downtown and enable people to more so they could park outside of downtown and they could walk into downtown or, maybe have a shuttle or something. So
that seems to be, that type of project would seem to be very directly impacted by the adoption of this policy. Do you have any sense of how, if that vision were to be pursued, how that would be affected?
If I understand correctly, you're referring to the construction or proposal of a garage in the downtown, how that would, how this policy would apply to that. I think that, and Farron Pearson, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that that hypothetical project would, because the trips are locally serving, meaning that residents are coming into the downtown that are local, and the trips that are being generated from the businesses downtown are already local. The parking garage in itself would be serving the customers that those businesses already serve. So instead of put simply, or another way is that instead of looking for parking on the streets, they would be parking in a garage structure. So.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me see. Oh, yeah. In terms of, so the currently proposed policy says project retail under 50K square feet would be screened out. In both the presentation and the staff report, there was this alternative of 30,000. Do you have a rough sense of what that difference is? I'm having a hard time visualizing it. So, how big is Living Spaces or Osh? How big is Trader Joe's or Safeway? Like ballpark, and just like.
Yeah. One example I could point to that offhand is the project Office Depot. The mixed-use project had a ground floor component along Broadway, and that was approximately 17,000 square feet. So if that project had retail on the entire ground floor, then it would be probably rough that just below 50,000, maybe call it double that, so around 40. So just roughly the floor area of, I think that site is about an acre, if I'm not mistaken, if that's 40,000 square feet. So there you have it. So the Office Depot property, that floor area would be just under that.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you. I think that's all of the questions that I have for clarification.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Any other commissioners, questions? It's kind of, oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Just for my own, so for years we've used the LOS, and now we're going to make a conversion, and we're going to, right? So now we're going to be using this.
Just for CEQA purposes, just for assessing transportation impacts from the perspective of the California Environmental Quality Act. We will still have the level of service policies in the general plan. That's not changing.
Okay. I was going to say which one is better, or is this more beneficial for development, or?
It would, it's a different way of thinking about transportation impacts. I'd say that because MILLBRAE is a small city and our corridor, El Camino Real corridor in our downtown are so close to transit, would be screened out. Most of the projects that we would see in the future would be screened out, which would help aid the city in promoting housing and jobs, office uses and things like that. So it is more favorable from that point of view. That being said, if you're outside of if a site is outside of that half mile of transit or high quality corridor, then we'd have to look at how much BMT it's creating and then mitigation measures. But to answer your question, it would be more favorable to the city in terms of advancing its goals.
Development. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So related to that, even looking at the mitigation measures for VMT, it seems that the way we think about going from LLS to VMT, we think about what's good for the environment is a little bit different. It's a different paradigm, right? How do the city ensure that we don't inadvertently create consequences like more congestion than we bargained for, or if now we have to wait for a much longer time at the traffic signal? What are some things that we could do to, and maybe it's a hypothetical question until an actual project comes up, but what could we do to make sure that doesn't happen?
So if a project, so LOS, under the LOS standards, you're evaluating how long you'd have to wait at an intersection, right, a stoplight. Those standards are still in the general plan, so we would look at what the standards are in the general plan to see if they're meeting or exceeding those, and if they're exceeding certain standards, then there could be some potential mitigation or some improvements to the intersection that the developers required. So we're not proposing to change any of that. So to answer your question, it would, any of the requirements, standards that apply to LOS are still there. Is that?
No, it does, and it's hard to, talk about this without an actual project, because now I'm worried that a developer might now have to be faced with additional burden or having to. So parking, for example, now there's one right answer to how many parking you provide. It can't be more than X, and it can't be less than X, and so therefore the answer is X, right?
Yeah. One example that I could point to, again, I'll use this example of 959 El Camino, is that that project has two ingress and egress points, one off of Meadow Glen and one off of El Camino. Now, originally, the applicant had proposed the residential parking off of Meadow Glen, meaning that if one were to need to, say, go towards San Bruno and go to San Fran and pick up something, you would exit the garage on Meadow Glen, head north on El Camino at that intersection. That potentially could have an impact on the LOS because the vehicle trips from exiting on Meadow Glen would increase the time you'd have to wait at that intersection. So what we did was we said, well, there's a lot of vehicle trips coming in and residential trips coming from that egress. We shifted the residential, most of the residential parking to access off of El Camino Real, so that intersection won't be as impacted. So in that case, that project was screened out from VMT. It was VMT. It was screened out from VMT, but we looked at the delay at that intersection. So instead of Meadow Glen, they would take access of El Camino. So that in that case, that's how we set.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Angelica, for the record, the City of MILLBRAE, we'd also like to clarify that when reviewing projects, it doesn't preclude them from additional policies that we have in place. So we do have like the general plan, which includes policy recommendations to address those issues that you've mentioned. Specifically in this VMT policy, the goal is really to address reduction for greenhouse gas emissions. So that's something I think that could hopefully that'll ease your concerns in regards to this specific policy. But again, I mean, we do have policies in place to also address the other issues that you've mentioned.
Thank you.
I think the issue that I see is that, with the level of service when you do the analysis, like you say, you may determine so much traffic and so much congestion or so much travel time to a particular site or so much parking. And then you would mitigate that by adding more parking or additional traffic lanes or in the past, so forth, so such. But I see for the VMT, if we identify that it's exceeding a certain VMT threshold, then I don't know if you can really reduce the VMT by making improvements. The only way I see that is if you collect fees because you exceed a certain VMT and then use those fees to make the city more walkable, develop bike paths, encourage people to use transportation, go on transit, put in more electric charging stations or use some of those monies to try to develop the city in a way that makes it more encouraging for people to walk or disability access or other improvements like that, or parking garage. Am I getting that right? I mean, how else are you going to reduce a VMT or if you collect the fees from that, what do you use that for? Because if you just, again, build more lanes on El Camino or make more left turn lanes, then you kind of defeat the purpose of this, right?
Well, I'll say that adding more lanes would be in conflict with this, so that wouldn't be possible under this policy, because the idea is that not to build capacity. Building capacity would induce more vehicle trips. So in that case, that wouldn't be consistent with the policy. If a project were to have already found to be above the VMT threshold, the project would then need to look at TDM measures to see whether that project can lower the VMT to below that threshold. So there's different measures that could be done. As you can see in the staff report, there's transit passes. There's multiple different things, and so the project would have to go through that and then apply as many TDM measures as they're willing to in order to lower that threshold. Now, if it's found that, hey, even with all these TDM measures, the VMT is still not below the threshold, then what that would mean is that there's still a significant transportation impact and you'd have to go through the EIR route. And so that doesn't necessarily preclude that project. You would just have to go through that route and you can't mitigate it. You might need to have a statement of right and considerations in order to approve the project.
Okay, so I guess, it goes back to my original thought, is just that if we have these policies, hopefully it doesn't make a lot of restrictions on like development or, for example, attracting tech hub or some larger business that can build economically prosperous for our city.
I think the gist of this is to almost make it easier. There are things that are getting screened out. They won't have to go through a process. Even if they don't get screened, if they can go under the threshold, they have yet one less step to do in order to be approved. So in essence, this is making it easier. Isn't that the whole point, to do infill development?
It would, compared to the old way, because waiting at an intersection will just it's very challenging. It would be very challenging to make that intersection go fast enough to where it would be like at acceptable levels. This VMT measure is measuring how far you have to travel to get to amenities. In an urban area like MILLBRAE, you can get to the grocery store, the banks pretty easily, and really that's what the goal is.
Okay, anybody else? Nathan?
Just one small technical question. So what form of a demonstration of mitigated So you said if it's not screened out and it doesn't fall below the threshold, the applicant has to demonstrate mitigations they're undertaking, quantifiably address, bring them back down below the threshold. So what form of analysis would that take? And what would be the basis for the quantification of the effectiveness of the measures?
Sure. That's a question for our transportation consultants, but I will say that the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, so CAPCOA, they've actually prepared a handbook, which is almost 800 pages with some recommendations to address reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So in Table 4, where there are recommendations, it references that CAPCOA handbook guide to address mitigation measures to minimize environmental impacts.
Thank you again, Commissioner, for the technical question. As Angelica mentioned, the CAPCOA handbook has detailed quantification approaches so that you can literally look at, how much VMT would be reduced by providing transit passes for your residents, how much VMT would be reduced by building a bike lane, for example, or connecting sidewalk gaps. And so, a development project would be required to use, the state of the practice. And CCAG also has an online tool that you can play around with, and you can do it in that mechanism as well. So also note that CCAG is working on an offsite mitigation program that would, for projects that can't mitigate their VMT on site, they would be able to do it offsite, and that'll be done end of next year.
Okay, appreciate the discussion. I guess a lot of times when we implement something new, we want to clarify and hope it meets the objective or there's none unforeseen consequences, and just talk through that. So I appreciate the staff discussion and commissioner comments. Right now, the subject is to make a recommendation. Yes, Nathan?
Sure. This is just a, sorry, go for it.
Before we move in that direction, I believe we still have to open up the public hearing for any public comments.
Okay, Christy, are there any speaker slips?
I had like a summary thing to say, so I'll wait until after the public comment, though.
Okay. Christy, are there any hands raised or speaker slips?
There are none.
Okay.
Move to close public comment.
Second.
Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Public comment is now closed.
Okay, final commissioner comments?
Yeah, so again, I hope the commission will grant me some forbearance on this. This issue is an issue that I care very deeply about. It's one of the reasons why I applied to be on this commission and have gone consistently to council comments is that I have a deep and abiding and passionate interest in addressing the climate crisis that we are all in. And we don't need any reminders of how urgent that is over the past year, the hottest in human history. And so I think it's important for us to, as Matt said, I think it is important for us to take a bold step and state our values in this policy. So I have some suggestions for things that I think we should do, and I'm hoping that there's some appetite on the commission to offer these as alternatives for the council to consider. So the first thing is that I do think we need to set a higher screening threshold for the following reasons. So first of all, the California Air Resources Board has said in their scoping plan from 2022 that all cities in California should be reduced, or the whole state needs to reduce its VMT by 25% by 2030 and 30% by 2045. So I think that, this is kind of a vision for what we should strive to achieve over the next decades. And one of the reasons why I asked the initial question, how often will we be revising this policy, is we don't know, like maybe we can set the threshold now, but how long are we locking that in for? So let's think about our general plan, right? Our general plan forecasts us out to 2040. If we assume that that's, I'm just going to assume that that's the time horizon for this VMT threshold policy. That takes us just to 5 years before the CARB goal of 30% by 2045. So should we not be considering that when we're evaluating projects proposed in MILLBRAE? And if we don't think that those projects will be 30% below VMT per capita, that we should explore how that can be mitigated. And as Commissioner Wong mentioned earlier, there's a lot of potential in MILLBRAE for VMT mitigation. I mean, you look at the map of how much of the city is screened out because of our proximity to the multimodal station, ECR. It's basically everywhere that we proposed development in our specific plan. So we're in a privileged position relative to our peers in San Mateo County because of our transit access. So if we are not willing to set a bold goal, who else in San Mateo County is going to do that? So I hope that we have some appetite for doing that. And that's, I think, the most important thing that I hope we can consider. And if that's really not in the cards, I think it might be helpful to at least open the policy with like a vision statement saying, acknowledging the CARB scoping goal to achieve 30% VMT reduction by 2045, so that that's a call to action when we look at the rest of the policy to realize over time we will need to revise this in order to meet the challenge as we get closer and closer to that date. I have some more minor things that sort of serious minor things that I wanted to point out too. So on the transportation projects, it mentions that any kind of auxiliary lane project, turn lane, or rehab project can be assumed to be little to no impact on VMT. I think we should be skeptical of that. There's news over the last couple of months of Caltrans using money for road rehabilitation or for active transportation to widen roads. So the budget is not for road widening, and yet they're using it for that. So I think we need to these sorts of projects deserve more scrutiny, especially because Caltrans has ECR or has jurisdiction over ECR. I think we need to be a little bit more careful and maybe consider striking those out from the category of transportation projects that should be assumed to have no impact. I think it might be helpful for the city council to have, similar to how we have a 15% screening map, if there's appetite to pursue a 30% threshold, have another map for what areas of the city fall into 30% below the county average. And of course, we mentioned earlier, like, what's the right baseline, right? Is it the whole Bay Area? Is it just San Mateo County, just the city? I'm open to considering other baselines that might make more sense. And then one more thing is that, and this is my most minor thing, is that in the set of mitigation strategies outlined in the policy proposal on, so I'm on page 12 of the policy. So right now, the extend transit network coverage, hours or frequency, and provide bus rapid transit are assigned a score of 3. They've been given the lowest, and they're in the lower effectiveness category. So these are the lowest categories of priority in terms of mitigation projects. I really think these need to be elevated. I think that, bus rapid transit on El Camino is something we've been talking about for years. And if we had it on El Camino, it really unlocks much more potential as a strategy to enable people to travel up and down the peninsula without having to drive. And likewise for network coverage, hours, or frequency. I think those are the keys to get people onto public transit. It's convenient for them. It takes them where they need to go. And if they're out late or they need to get an early morning shift, the service is running for them. So just in summary, I know I unspooled a lot of content there, but I think it's important for us to consider a higher threshold, bolder threshold for VMT screening, and with the corresponding supplemental material to enable people to make an informed decision about that. I think some of the transportation projects, particularly auxiliary lanes, turn lanes, and rehab projects, we should cross that off the list as being given should not be analyzed, just because we know Caltrans has claimed those projects has claimed projects under those categories, but then has actually used them to widen. And then finally, I think that some of the mitigation strategies, particularly around public transit, deserve a higher applicability score and more priority as being suggested as mitigation measures. So that's all I have to say. And like I said, I found this discussion very illuminating, and it's something I care a lot about. Thank you.
Yes, Maureen?
2 things. Thank you, Nathan. If the council wants to go bolder, that's great, but it has to be balanced against our other goals as well in terms of bringing more housing and development to the town. So there's a balance. But this whole thing is being driven by the state of California. And if they have a state goal to go farther, they will change the law on us. So even if we don't change our calendar, they probably will change our calendar for us. So, you know what I mean? If they've got the goals that they want to get by 2020, 2030, 2040, they will change this number most likely for us. But if we want to get ahead of it, that's fine. I don't know how much more work that means for you guys. But
Well-
I mean, I don't think that this number, I don't think we would not change it before 2040. The state of California will probably make us change it, even if we don't. So there's that.
Through the chair. Once again, we're going to recommend it, and so if you feel strongly about it, I think when you recommend it, you can add little blurbs to it, right? We've done that before, like the Planning Commission encourages you to look at this, and this with little amendments, but that would mean that all of us would have to agree. And I don't know if it's worth it. I know it is for the end result, but this is a recommended, and it's been recommended by the experts, supposedly. So how does everybody else feel about it? I think that's what it needs to look at. Isn't that right? If we wanted to the resolution with, they're not amendments, but it's recommendations for them to look at when they review the project, right?
Yeah, if the motion, we obviously need a motion, right, to pass this item to the
Right.
council, either way. And if that motion is to recommend that the council adopt the resolution as proposed, noting that commission had wants the council to explore
Higher threshold.
higher thresholds, we can include that in their in the staff report for them to consider.
So that being said, you did a wonderful presentation, but we can't put that in there. So if you were to choose, like when we approve a project subject to da-da-da-da-da-da, and then if you were to say that, and we all agreed, then we can pass it on to the council as such. Did I make myself clear?
I think I would recommend, there was a lot of question, a lot of discussion here about the actual threshold and the definition of the threshold. And maybe if we just have an explanation or a cut sheet about what that threshold is and what the different options are. Is it regional?
We have to make it kind of simple.
Yeah.
We're going to make it.
Or versus local San Mateo County? Might help the council understand it better, and then also it helps them to understand how conservative this threshold is versus the different options. So I'd like the bare minimum that the state requires, or are we going a little bit beyond? Yeah. Which we can always go beyond, but not less restrictive.
So if you were to have a wish list and want to recommend this kind of subject to a few things, what would you pinpoint? I mean, you're not going to write. And then I would tend to think if there's a couple of items that you would like them to look at, it probably could be done if we all agree.
I want to ask, the state's mandate is that local jurisdiction adopt a policy that uses VMT, right? It doesn't specify thresholds or, how we go about doing the work. Okay. So it's hard to disagree with almost anything that Nathan said. I mean, yes, I'm all for taking bold actions. I just don't know what 15% means versus 30% versus 25%. I just don't know what that actually means. And I don't know if we will ever know until we start using it. But so I wouldn't be able to, I don't feel like I have enough information to go with actually any number. Of course, there's a number on the table which the consultant has presented, and one which appears that's used widely in the region.
Yeah, through the chair, the 15% threshold was recommended to us by OPR, so that's where we got that number. Just for clarification.
Thanks.
So I think I'm open to having a discussion about it and laying out options. So I think one way we could, state what the range of possibilities are for, the community council is sort of lay out precisely, I have heard that there's some flexibility on what the baseline is. And I actually just heard today what those VMT numbers are. And, the consultant said CCAG's number is 14.5, San Mateo's is 13.8, and MILLBRAE's is 13. When, I wrote down at one point a number for, what the statewide average was, which was 24.6. And the goal, if you do the math on the CARB goal, we're talking about 18.4 or 17.2. So, I mean, I think it's worthwhile to call these out, right? Like, you know, here are some options for baseline. You have your statewide baseline, your CCAG baseline, your San Mateo baseline, and the MILLBRAE baseline. And we can say, you know, the threshold level could be anywhere between 15 and 30, right? I mean, if you were to apply the 30% threshold to the statewide number, 17.2, I mean, according to the number I heard today, we're already below that, right? So maybe we don't, but I still think it's still, I think it would be worthwhile to call that out as like, hey, if we're at 13, we should still, maybe 15% of 13, right? That's still lower than the CARB goal. It acknowledges the position we're in terms of how much, you know, the transit resources and walkability resources that we have, but then it still sets a goal saying, hey, over time, we want to reduce VMT per capita in MILLBRAE to something lower than 13. So I think, so I guess that's sort of, in terms of Commissioner Quigg, what you said about what would I like to see in the attached to the resolution, I think that would be sufficient. It would be, hey, let's consider some alternative baselines, and let's all consider what a threshold of 15% of MILLBRAE's baseline, how that's different from the CCAG baseline, and so forth.
I think what the commission should keep in mind too, as they're deliberating, is that this threshold would apply only to a small portion of potential future development. A large majority of the development that we're going to foresee in the future will be screened out. Not all projects will. It's hard to forecast where the development will be in 5-10 years. But given the screening criteria, anything within a half mile of El Camino or the BART station should be screened out. So now we're really talking about areas of the city that are up by 280 that have commercial zoning designation or multifamily in the areas kind of beyond that. So just to keep in mind.
So basically, if we actually look at the resolution that we're supposed to forward to the city council, it's general. It's pretty general. And we're not going to make the decision. And it's really up to the city council to make the decision.
But Catherine, it's general, but it's referencing attachment 1, right? So if we make a recommendation, it's what's written in attachment 1.
In the resolution.
Correct, okay.
I think that's fair if we just add one cut sheet really defining what that VMT is, the baseline, and just have a definition and then have comparisons of other definitions that other jurisdictions use, as Nathan's mentioned. I think that might be fair. And then also have a mission statement, just to the intent and how this is consistent with the general plan and encourage general plan objectives. I think that wouldn't be that hard to do, to pass this with those two recommendations. Staff? Maureen?
I'm for just passing it as is, but Nathan, I hate to put the burden on you, but I want you to write the most amazing memo ever and get it to the city council immediately so that they have time to read it before they get this project and before they make their decisions. Because you are the expert on this board, the rest of us don't know everything. And, you've made some valid points, But, this is probably a great start. I think we can all acknowledge that everything we do evolves with time. And so hopefully we would make adjustments as we need to. But you planting that seed in their head right now about the kinds of numbers we're talking about and why we'll need to do it in the future could help them make decisions.
I think the question is just, the consultant for the city put together that great presentation. A lot more information that was in our package here. So if this city was able just to have them put that together, they're the experts to do that. It wouldn't take them much time, probably at all. Anyways, do we have a motion?
I do. So the motion would be to adopt the resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Millbrae, recommend that the City Council adopt a citywide vehicle miles traveled VMT thresholds and screening policy establishing VMT as the metric for conducting transportation impact analysis for the purpose of environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, to comply with the requirements of Senate Bill 743. See the attached resolution. Good?
I'll second it. And I like Maureen's comment very well. So send that to the city council. They'll do it.
Ready? Commissioner Choi?
Aye.
Commissioner Chan?
Aye.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I was going
Commissioner
this way.
Davis?
Aye.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
And Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
Yeah. Yeah, good comments. Appreciate Nathan's thoughts on those. Maybe staff can consider that when they make the
All you
presentation
said
to the
was
council.
kinda over my head. That's why I said if you could do something like 1, 2, 3, that's real simple. But I think her comment is good. Get it to the city council. They're the ones who are going to make the decision. They're not going to care what we do.
Okay, we're heading into our last hearing item, item C. This is for 620 and 30 Rollins Road, 201 and 231 Adrian Road, 230 Harriet Tubman Way, 231 Millbrae Avenue. Consider conditions of approval, amendments to the conditions of approval of the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences Millbrae project. Roscoe?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Wong, and members of the Planning Commission. I will be doing a verbal presentation for this item as it's a procedural item. But basically, a background, the city approved the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences project a couple years ago in 2021. And with that, a vesting tentative map. The vesting tentative map allows the Subdivision Map Act allows an automatic 2-year timeframe to submit the final map. And this item is really just giving the developer the extension required to, under the Subdivision Map Act, in order to give them time to file their final maps with the city. So this is just a procedural item that in most cities would be a consent calendar item. But just to give you a little bit of background on what is involved with that is that the amendment to the conditions of approval are twofold. One is to extend the entitlements vested under the original approval to line up with the tentative map extension. And two is that to clarify that the applicant may submit multiple maps instead of just one map. It was just singular as it was originally written, and we just want to clarify that multiple maps can be submitted, and that is at the request of the applicant. Additionally, in the yellow folders at the dais this evening, the applicant's request has been included in there if you wanted to take a look at that. So this is just kind of a procedural item. It's typically just a routine, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
And I believe the applicant's here too, if you have any questions for the applicant.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff or applicants? Okay.
Is it fair game to ask how construction's going?
If you want to get up to me. Toon Jordan from Alexandria. Melissa will be able to answer that question.
Hi, I'm Toon Jordan from Alexandria. I'm the project manager for the development project. So construction, we started construction in 2022, and 230 here at Tubman is going great. We have a tenant sign up, and they're taking the whole building. We're on track to be delivering the building in 2024, and they are planning to move in 2025, in early 25. And when you guys drive by on MILLBRAE Avenue, you can see the glass is now going up, the middle panel's going up. So we're working fast to try to wrap the building up before the rain comes.
Of course. Excellent. Thank you for the update. Appreciate it.
I'm happy about that. I'm happy.
Oh, Toon, if you can stay there, just in case there's any other questions. Any other questions? So the, just question, is the previous MILLBRAE property on the northeast corner, that transfer has been done, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it's ownership by the new property?
Yes, so we
Okay.
do own that.
Okay,
in
great.
its entirety now.
And then just clarification that this extension was for a 6-year extension starting now? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. And if the developer should provide those maps earlier and finalize them earlier, then this is a done deal. What is the delay for the request for extension?
Is there a delay to the construction? Is that the question?
A delay in the maps?
Oh, delay in the maps. Well, usually we like to not finalize the map until the buildings are completed, as there are changes. For example, if PG&E decides to take a different path to the building, then that changes the PG&E easement. So we would just prefer to wait until everything's ready and record it when each building's completed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
But there's no reason to think that, in other words, the 6 years should be more than sufficient.
6 years?
I see that there's a
The
request to
extension?
extend it.
Yeah,
It should be more than sufficient, correct?
I hope so.
I hope so.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, thank you. Tim?
It's looking very nice. I'm very excited.
Okay, any other public comments or hands raised?
No slips, no hands.
Okay. Do we have a vote to close public comments?
I make a motion to close public comment.
Second.
Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. Public comment is now closed.
Okay, any commissioner comments, motions, discussion? Okay, Dan?
Do we have to read the whole thing, both of them?
Kindly.
Kinda. It's that second one that's bugging me. One at a time? We have to vote on them separately? Are there 3 things to vote on? Or just 2 resolutions?
It's very long.
Well, the second one includes a lot of APNs.
It's all written there.
You can just refer
The
to
the first resolution is the one that was passed in 2021, I believe.
Oh,
That's correct.
cool.
If you want, you could refer to making the motion to adopt the resolution as stated on page 4 of the staff report. There's a planning commission action there.
Okay, then make a motion to approve the resolution noted on page 4 of the staff report.
Second.
One more time. Commissioner Choi?
Aye.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Quigg?
Yes.
Chair Wong?
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes 5-0.
yeah, thank you. Okay, so that concludes the hearing items. And move on to item number 5 for new business. Any staff updates?
Yes, the next planning commission meeting originally scheduled for December 18 will be canceled due to a lack of items. And in a couple of weeks, we'll know whether we'll have one in the first week of January. The first meeting in January is a holiday, so if we were to have that, we would quorum the commission for a different day that week. But we'll let you know either way around the week of the 18th. Additionally, just a follow-up from the last planning commission meeting on November 20th, the city did not receive any appeals for either of the projects. And happy holidays.
Thank you. Sure. Catherine.
Based on that conversation with the vehicle traffic and the stuff, we had approved something on the residential parking on Meadow Glen, right? When we had approved that project. You made mention today that you changed it in order to qualify?
No, when the commission approved the project, it was already
Okay,
changed. It was during the staff review
okay,
of that, we looked at that.
okay,
So we brought it forward with that already.
okay. Thank you. I just was like, how did they? That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so just clarification on our agenda items, new business, there were none by staff, and that was staff updates. So now we're heading into the final item for planning commissioner announcements. If there are any announcements?
Nope.
Okay. I heard we had a successful tree lighting.
Oh my God, there were so many kids. Were you there?
No, I wasn't.
Well, I'll tell you, I wasn't involved, and I didn't have any kids. It was lovely, though. It was really nice to see so many people having fun. And the snow was fabulous.
Okay, and just to reiterate what Roscoe mentioned, happy holidays, everybody. Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Meeting adjourned.
Happy holidays.